Hello, church. This is April 15th. Well, I spent much of the morning talking with some of you some on Zoom and some on the phone. And I've waved to some of you from a distance, and I've seen some of you as you stop by the church to hang maybe a spring wreath on the front door, or maybe pick up sticks in the lawn, or fix the Friends and Faith sign. This virus isn't keeping us from spring cleaning, and it isn't keeping spring from coming and the grass from growing. I imagine pretty soon even the lawnmowers are going to be coming out. When I talk with you on the phone, I hear people expressing boredom with being stuck inside, maybe chomping at the bit to want to get at some projects which they can't do now because they're social isolating. And some are struggling with that isolation too, and struggling with a lack of real human contact. After a while, a Zoom meeting isn't enough. We really want to be in physical proximity with one another. But I also hear some deep thankfulness for the way our congregation has kept in touch with one another. A big thank you to our web spinners who have been sending cards and letters and making phone calls to folks in the congregation. Many of you have asked how I'm doing in all this, and if there's any way that you can help, or wanting to know what about those who have some maybe some bigger needs than what we're aware of, or what we might be aware of. Well, I want to talk to you today a little bit about anxiety, and coming from a family systems approach. We all feel anxiety to a certain degree, and one of the ways we manifest anxiety is in trying to control others around us. And that is just a nearly impossible goal to meet, to try to get others to do what we want, when we should instead be focusing on our own behavior, trying to control ourselves. I mean, that's hard enough. That's a hard enough goal to have. So anxiety is our response to either a real threat or an imagined threat. And we have a real threat in the COVID-19 virus. And we need to respond thoughtfully and wisely, knowing how viruses and outbreaks, how they work. I appreciated Dr. Anthony Fauci saying that we need to assume that we are behind in our response where we think we are. So we do need to act, and to act wisely. But there are also threats which are imagined. Maybe these are threats that kind of come into our thinking and into our minds, and maybe they come with they kind of come unbidden about, okay, what could happen to my family, or to my job, or what could happen to the church. These imagined threats really can spin out of control, and it takes some discernment to know the difference between what's being prepared for an eventuality or from a possibility, the difference between that and what is being excessively or even debilitatingly worried. And I'm just, I love that Jesus said in his Sermon on the Mount, when the portion where he's talking about, but what I had spoken to you about before at one point, about the looking at the birds, looking at the flowers, and not to worry. He ends that section with this line: "Don't worry about tomorrow, because today has enough trouble of his own." It's just a realistic view that there are troubles, and today has its own, and today is enough for you and I to carry. Don't worry about tomorrow. It's important to remember that we can only manage our own anxiety. We can't manage someone else's. We'd like to, but we can't. However, when we're connected to someone in a healthy way, it is possible that if we lower our anxiety, that often, not always, that can produce good behavior in someone else. That's why we kind of work as a system together within families, even within congregations. So our lowered anxiety, it might lower their anxiety, or they might cause them to lower their anxiety. It might cause others to have maybe a little bit more increased anxiety, to take more responsibility. We never know how acting correctly or acting non-anxiously, what impact it'll have on others. We just know that we can't directly control them anyway. So the question is, what does anxiety, what does it look like in you these days? How does it manifest itself? Knowing what that looks like in you, that will help you to choose how to respond. It can get you out of a kind of those future-oriented anxious thoughts that you might have. Um, and to do that, one way to do that is just by having kind of that mantra, that verse that I just mentioned about today has enough worry of its own, to get you out of thinking about what could happen in the future and just have you focused on what is real today and what is right before you, whether that's a person or a concern or maybe a real threat. How do I respond to this today, not to something in the future, which I can't control anyway. So a second helpful thing about how to manage our anxiety in a practical way is being able to differentiate your emotions, which are your emotional reactions to things, to differentiate those things from your thoughts, and then also to differentiate your thoughts and feelings from those of others. I mean, you may have a higher risk tolerance than others, and so this lockdown on activities, that may feel like an overreaction to you, and someone's caution may drive you crazy because you think like, why are we doing this? It seems overly cautious. Knowing what your thoughts are and what someone else's thoughts are is a way of can help you to lower your anxiety, to respond not by a reaction against them, but to respond thoughtfully. And growing in this differentiation, yeah, it really is a lifelong thing, and no one ever reaches the end. No one ever arrives at the end that, okay, now I'm now fully differentiated. So, since it's a process, it is best to start practicing it early and often. And here are four things to practice. The first is notice your feelings, and then respect them without being controlled by them. So to think about your feelings. This is how I'm reacting to this situation. Can I think about that? Can I think about, notice, how am I reacting? What prompts that reaction? When do I find myself caught up in it? The second thing is to think about those reactions and not just to feel them. Have thoughts about your feelings, not just to analyze them, but to kind of bring them into your upper cortex of your brain, to think about, why am I responding like this? The third one is to stay connected with those that you disagree with, those that you might think are responding in a completely crazy manner. We need to stay connected with those people, listening to their thoughts and listening to their feelings, thinking about them, receiving them, listening to them, staying connected with those people. And then this fourth point goes hand in hand with that, is then for you to define your own thoughts and feelings to them. Instead of throwing up your hands and saying, oh, that's ridiculous, to say, well, this is how I see it. This is how I see this situation. Defining your own principles, saying, here is what I think, and here's how I will act. Those things can help you to lower your anxiety, but also to kind of create a space in which anxiety is lowered within your system, whether that's a family or whether that's your workplace or maybe that's your church. How you act will influence the whole system. And so you might take a few minutes and then write down one of your principles, a principle that you can bring to this challenge of COVID-19 and our current situation. Write it down. How will I act on my principles during this time? That's a way to be thoughtful about our responses, and not just to be reactive. So, in me, this is the way anxiety manifests itself. It's usually by wanting to get kind of everything straight in my thinking, to try to figure it all out ahead of time, so that I can kind of master it, and so that I won't make mistakes. So you should see me on Saturday night and on Sunday morning as I am mentally going through this checklist of our online worship. All these things which I've never done before, and if it wasn't online, I can do most of these things pretty habitually and regularly without as much thought. But now I'm going through kind of what moves here and what part of the computer program needs to be active this time, and how do the cameras work. And I am just completely in my head. And so what I need to do to lower that anxiety is I need to be aware of my feelings and my thoughts, and knowing and to discern when I'm working hard, which is a good thing, and when I'm over-functioning, trying to do away with any mistake so that worship might not be distracting, or to make sure that the worship service is perfect. That's over-functioning. I'm not the only one doing this dance of worship before God. You are as well, and you have your own part to play in that. So one of my principles, and which I fail at regularly, is doing that thing with my head, is trying to get out of my head space and my thoughts, and then trying to be physically present with my family when they ask me to be. So that means when Mary asks me to go for a walk, is just to say yes to that. Or when Sam, I can tell when Sam wants to have a wrestling or tickling match with me, just to say yes, to put down the newspaper, put down trying to make sense out of what to me looks like political chaos, and instead connect with the real people that I'm with, my wife and my son, or to connect with you, even if it's just by phone, to get out of my head and trying to figure it all out and just be present with what is real. And so as you deal with your own anxiety and the anxiety within your system, remember these words of Jesus, and may it just kind of echo throughout your day, in your heart and in your head. Do not worry about tomorrow. Today has enough trouble of its own. Give your energy towards today, not towards tomorrow. And then notice how your anxiety manifests itself. And thirdly, act on your principles. Next week, I'm going to address anxiety again, but this time I'm going to do so from the point of view of our unique personalities and how our anxiety gets manifested through who we are. This will be a little bit out of the Enneagram and some other things. So it'll be another look at anxiety, but from a little bit different perspective. So until next time, church, act in love. Be present with those that you see. Have the same mercy for yourself that Christ does for you. And all blessings be yours. We'll see you soon. Goodbye.